I need some traction. You need some traction.
Hey folks, Lloyd Lobo here, co-founder at Boast.Al and Traction. Today's Traction webinar is brought to you by Boast.Al and Launch Academy in partnership with Growth Blazers. Exciting topic today on how to scale leadership through real-time bias-free conversations for high growth. Couldn't find a better speaker on the topic than Dave MacLeod. He's the co-founder of ThoughtExchange. ThoughtExchange is the world's only enterprise discussion management platform powered by anti-bias technology. They've grown to over 200 people. ThoughtExchange is on the Deloitte Fast 500 list, one of the fastest growing companies. Dave's also the author of Scaling Conversations, where he shares proven tactics for leaders to break down self-serving feedback loops. And what Dave often says is most of us these days are stuck in this endless reinforcing loop of our staff tells us what we want to hear. We validate those same thoughts via activities such as one-to-many meetings or intimate meetings with direct reports. We produce post-mortems meant to show what we're in touch with, et cetera, et cetera. All this like trapped in a cycle of sort of biased conversations, which is one of the biggest fears and leads to leadership failure. So we're going to talk about how to break these silos, how to have unbiased conversations and scale leaderships. Folks, as you're joining in, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us, like David did, introduce yourself to everyone, where you're tuning in from and what you're looking to get out of the session. And without further ado, Dave, take it away.
How's it going, everybody? As people filing in here, I'm going to try to keep this high bit rate and also reward people who show up. It looks like the Traction YouTube channel is going off the charts and people watching afterwards, but there's benefit to people joining live too. So I'm hoping to give you some thinking about bias and about conversations in an interesting way. I'm actually I didn't know whether I should brag or not, but I'm currently broadcasting live from Kauai, and wanted to hand it back because we chatted a little bit ahead, Lloyd, about the concept of I don't know. Let's start it like you're a new dad. Let's actually go back there. We were having an interesting conversation just before we started. Let's back up just to that and share them a little bit. I think it's important.
Definitely. So what right before this, we were having this interesting conversation with Dave's in Kauai, and he's like, should I even share that? And I think everyone should take time off, right? So I just had my third kid and I decided to take paternity leave. And I saw this around the same time, a tweet from Joe Lonsdale says, men who take paternity leave are losers or something to that effect. And I think, it's the biggest outcomes from Airbnb to Shopify are founder-led. And if founders don't take care of themselves personally, then they won't take care of themselves professionally. I had a tough year where I almost died from COVID. So and I realized that, the key thing is taking care of yourself personally. And so after doing a couple of startups and not seeing my two other kids grow up, I decided to take paternity leave after my third kid. And I'm still doing the Traction stuff, but like off from the day-to-day. So I think it's really, really important to recharge. It's not the money in your bank, it's the people around your tombstone. So make sure people this holiday season take the time to recharge. And so Dave, when he tuned in, he's in Kauai taking the next couple of weeks off. And what's funny is for us at Boast, our business has grown. We're setting new records every month for new ARR and new revenue. And I'm sure Dave's company has scaled where if he gets hit by a bus, it's going to run and still grow. And hopefully that's the culture and leadership you've created. And we're going to talk all about that, is how the biggest fear leaders have is like, how do I set the culture and scale the vision and the output without me in the room? And that's all you're going to talk about today.
Yeah, that's great. All right, that's where I want to dig in. And I just kicked my kids out down to the beach, and they might come back in the middle of the presentation, but I think that's kind of okay. And I also, by the way, think that maternity, paternity, I don't know why people think that they should tell other people how to live their lives, is my response to that tweet. Platinum rule: treat others how they want to be treated, not how you want to be treated. Okay. I was just glad that I shared that story, because I think being a good dad is a good thing. So I'm going to try to, again, keep this high value for you. We're going to start by some thoughts, and then I'm actually going to have you participate. And so I can see there's about 50 people in here, and we're going to get a chance to actually think together in just a minute. But I'm going to go through some ideas around scaling conversations to disrupt failure in general, because I mean, that's the thing. We're all trying to disrupt something in tech, but really, aren't we really trying to disrupt failure? And how can we think about that in the lens of conversations? I'm going to start with this, and I hope this hurts the brain a little bit. Frequency does not equal importance. Okay. Whenever your brain goes and learns something new, like Bugs Bunny chasing Elmer Fudd around, if you try to do that, it's not easy the first time. Your brain looks through something. Frequency, just because you hear something lots of times doesn't mean it's important. I'm going to go back to this later on, but I really want to start with it so that I can end with it. And our ability to converse is our ultimate competitive advantage as a business, as a species. That's actually how we first were able to grow across the planet as humans, is we could have facial recognition, have conversations across kin groups, remember promises we made to one another, that ultimately leads to us making promises in our devices held in our pockets for millions of dollars. And that led ultimately from the idea that we could actually speak with one another and converse. But conversation is something that doesn't happen a lot in organizations. So who the hell am I to quote myself? I also call this slide establishing credibility. So I'm the CEO of ThoughtExchange. I'm the author of this book, Scaling Conversations. It's a Wiley publication. I'll give you a link, a free link to it if you like. Best review I've had of this from several people is they said, Dave, I actually read your damn book, which I thought, great. And then they also said it had some value to it. But first of all, it's readable. It's short. I try to be quick. So ThoughtExchange, we're fast growth. Like I said, we're a Deloitte Fast 500 company this year, proudly. We're being used by a lot of leading organizations, and I mean leaders like Microsoft, Facebook, et cetera. The concept is include everyone, discover actions that matter, and create alignment by making sure that you hear from everyone. So I'm going to put that in the context, though, of everybody talking about this, I don't know, reimagination, refresh, resignation, whatever. People are looking at their lives right now and wondering how to spend their time before people gather around their tombstone. And it really is coming down to this concept, which is 4 words: feedback that goes unheard. If you're on this call, you're a leader of some sort. And this is actually frustrating, because how much of our lives do we actually spend trying to hear people, when actually at the end of the day, people are like, I'm leaving because I really feel deeply unheard. So on that note, here's an example of unheard. Everyone I've asked agrees with me, said every leader since ever. The reason this is a joke is that it resonates with too many people. Is that, yeah, I talk to people, they say they agree with me, and then later on I found out that maybe they didn't, but everyone I talk to seems to agree with me, especially if you happen to be white and male and live in unearned privilege land. This reality is sort of larger because of all sorts of racist history of people that look like me. But I'm gonna actually try to put another nugget in your mind today that most conversations aren't. They just aren't conversations. There's a lot of things that makes a conversation, but actually most conversations aren't actually conversations. You think they are, and then they aren't. And people feel unheard, and you wonder why they're leaving or why they don't join you. And ultimately it's because the conversations you think you're having are not actually conversations. So that's what I'm hoping to get out of this today, is that we'll go through and you'll get a chance to figure out at least my definition of what a conversation is. So first of all, this is our agenda for today. We're going to run an exchange about next year with everybody who attended live. I'm going to talk a bit about this idea of scaling conversations, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end, and hopefully we'll have people engaged and on board. So without further ado, we're going to actually, leaders are out of touch with employees and need a wake-up call. Everyone's seen this sort of 30,000 people studied, etc. And we have 2022 hitting in front of us. So I've actually made a quick exchange here for everybody on this meeting. We're going to participate in this. You can either, I'll throw a link in the chat. You can use your phone. Also, I'm just demonstrating ThoughtExchange has been hybrid for a decade now. And so we actually invented most of our tech to be hybrid. So I'm going to put the link in the chat as well so that you can, if you like, oh, that's nice, use the QR code or jump in using the link I just put in the chat. I can see 17 in there. I'm going to tell you this is going to be about 5 minutes. So if you're here on the call, I recommend go ahead and it'll be worth it. for you to spend some time sharing and reading the thoughts of other people on the call. The question I decided to ask this group, or let's think together about the challenges tech leaders need to address for their company and for the planet in 2022. Another thing that happens, a phenomenon, is people are thinking, well, maybe I see there's more than 20 people in here. Am I going to sit and watch? I'm going to join the conversation. You know, I might as well just join the conversation. Maybe share a thought or two, and then rate, see how many you can rate inside this. I'm also going to employ a tactic here that is an unused skill of many facilitators, which is to just be quiet for a little bit while people think together. So I'm going to give 4 minutes here for you to share some thinking, and then consider what everybody else on the call is thinking as well, and see if we can figure out what's important to us in a minute or two here. So hopefully you found some value in considering the thoughts of one another. I'm going to actually unpack that just a little bit, because I'm just curious what we think together. So just as people are wrapping up the last bit of rating, I could keep this open for quite a while, and I'm going to press stop here. So before I get into the rest of the conversation, I'm just going to actually figure out what we learned from one another, and then we'll go in and unpack some of this stuff. There's that word at the very top that I'm going to hopefully challenge for a lot of companies today. I'm just going to give you a quick look. There's 30 of us or so sharing 44 thoughts. Those got considered 500 times. Let's just see the shift. I'm going to actually talk about that shift. Is that the most frequent words are around people, etc. The most important words were around talent and leadership. And I'm just going to take a quick look at what came to the top across a few. So diversity. There's 2 thoughts in here: cultivating diversity and embracing diversity. Again, they only got said once or twice, but they're actually rated the highest as a group in the whole conversation. So how else do you get conversation? So it's not the most frequent thought, but it's the most important thought. Cultivating diversity and respect for diverse groups and ideas. Thank you very much who shared that and who rated that high. Let's just look at a few thoughts around keeping people engaged and feeling valued, engaging talented people. I'm going to really dig into this and hopefully allow you to think about this in a bit of a new framework. We'll see. Let's look at a few more. Setting remote work boundaries. I heard a lot about this right now. Flexible schedules, but then also, if everyone's flexible, what are the boundaries? Can anyone talk to anyone at any time? And a lot of things have changed. These are just some unthemed thought. Understanding what employees need and creating actionable items will drive this change. Amen. Securing talent, communication, a hybrid model. Let's look at a couple more. On the product side, a lot of flexibility in your planning and what you're building, a lot of product fit. It's hard to pivoting the software every other day to decide whether or not we're staying fully remote or we're back to the office and things like that. And then the final group is market competition. That's good, but also just a quick observation isn't it interesting right now that diversity and people and engagement and feeling valued and understood and respected and all that thing is that's actually coming to the top. And then a few people are like, oh, by the way, we still have a product that needs to compete in the marketplace. It's also important, but it's interesting. And I do a lot of these sort of events, and a lot of people are right now talking about people in the world, which is maybe not such a bad thing. Thanks for that. And thanks for those interacting. You can see from the behalf of the whole group, thank you very much. It keeps this hybrid world alive when we interact with one another. So I'm going to try to actually challenge a few things I put in there so that if this was just an agreement festival, maybe you wouldn't feel like it was a fully valuable time together. There was some good insights there. It was lovely to see diversity come to the top. People are just starting to actually understand the value of that. There's no trade-off between embracing diversity and business success. In fact, it's an accelerant. Those who haven't figured that out are going to get crushed by those who have. So I hope your organization is, on behalf of your organization, one of those organizations that is figuring it out. Okay, so let's actually talk about what a conversation is for a moment, and hopefully this will be there'll be interesting aspects. So first of all, someone walks up and says, "What would you like to drink?" People say, "I don't know, give me a beer." Sure, give me a beer. Maybe a white male says, "You know what? Round of beers for everyone, on behalf of everyone." And someone says, "Well, hold up, it's a beautiful day. It's one of maybe the last nice day for a long time. I'd like a margarita." And don't you make a world-class margarita? And everyone says, "Oof, actually, that's a good idea. Can I change my order? I would also like a margarita." "Yeah, me too." Round of margaritas. the reason I put this is that this is a core insight, is that a conversation is the ability for a small group of people to actually converse, share their thinking, and actually change their point of view based on thinking of other people. Just like in that conversation we just had, you're like, wow, here's what I think is important. And then you saw other thoughts, you're like, no, actually, that's really good. That's really important. That's every conversation you have inside a small group of people. It goes that way. As you say, actually, let's chat with your team. Everyone shares ideas. You have what sort of action should we take? You're talking to 6 or 7 people. After a couple minutes, you're like, actually, that's a really good one. Let's go ahead and do that. What does not happen is there is no one who says, pause, sorry, no, we can't do that. That only got said 1 time. Doesn't matter that everyone changed their mind. This idea got said 9 times. So we actually have to go with the thing that got said 9 times. Because that one thing, more like, well, we all agree, we've all changed our mind. We all think this is the most important thing. Right, we can't, we have to just count up. And that seems like I'm talking in absurdity, but actually the truth is conversations don't scale. Because by the time you go out and talk to 100 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people, what do? You send an open-ended survey and you count up responses. You go and speak to 50 people and you say, this got said 20 times, therefore it must be the most important. So what I want to arm you with as a part of this is that conversation is the building block of a company, because people, it's not just what people think as individuals, it's actually what we believe together in order to achieve our purpose. But they don't scale for really good reasons. The first one is social awkwardness. The second one is loud voices. And the third one is bias. And these are all things you should be familiar with. But I mean, one thing is that most times in events like this, somebody's chatting and they say, yeah, thoughts from anybody? And that's what you get. Crickets, social awkwardness. You get, well, you know, any group more than 10 or so, everyone, I don't know if I want to be the first. Do I want to be the person that's seen to be talking right now? Or do I not want to be that person? Or is it a power move? Or is it, never mind. It's easier to just be quiet, except for somebody that does go into chats and does talk. And what I like to say is picture that extended family member who posts something political, post something on social media every time something political happens. Now, 2 questions that are both equally interesting. One is rhetorical. Do they fairly represent you and your family? I'm going to go ahead and say that's a rhetorical question. And no, that they very likely do not represent you and your whole family. Question number 2, though, is what do you do about that? Do you go with your family and say, hey, did you see what that person just put on social media? Let's go on there, each of us as family member, and put a post one by one and say, we all want to say one at a time, we don't actually agree with this and we don't want it to represent how we think together. It's a complex issue and we all think very fairly. Do you do that? No, this is what you do. This is what everyone does. Crickets. What happens is we phone each other beneath the fold and we say, or we message each other and say, did you see what that? And you have a conversation that's in the private scape, not in front of everybody. The majority of people are having a conversation one-on-one in the private view, where the person that is loud, that doesn't necessarily represent everybody, is the only voice that's out there in the public domain. And we'll actually go back to like the person that tweets, everybody, and guys who take time off from maternity are actually like idiots, or whatever that tweet was. It's like, I didn't want to fight back against that. I totally took paternity with my kids as much as possible. I'm trying to be a good dad, but I'm not going to get in that fight. I'm just going to like talk to people offline about that, because I don't want to be out in social media talking about the fact that that's just some tweet from the 1800s. But the truth is, we have a hard time actually having a conversation out in the public. So lots of that conversation just happens. But the next thing that happens actually is that we don't necessarily get to the truth, because there's kinds of bias. There's biases that we know, like we listen more to people that look like ourselves, and we're like, yeah, I'm pretty aware of that. I'm trying to do works around that. There's bias that you don't know. Like I've heard of that. I might have an unknown effect on people, or I might actually, there might be things about me that make different behaviors happen. I don't really understand, but there's some biases related to me. I'll figure them out one day. But then there's biases you don't know, and you don't even know you don't know them. One example that came out to light, that if you search this, the parole granted after lunch, this essence here is that the groups of judges were found via data that they are much more likely to grant parole after lunch. There's a hangry bias. The data showed that if right before lunch, if that's your parole hearing, that is not a good time for parole, because people at that moment are hangry. And this would be probably a not nice thing to figure out as a judge, is that your hungriness came in the way of justice, but it's something that actually data can show. The bias is all around us. We all bring so many different bias into a conversation that it's actually almost impossible to have a conversation because it's in the way. So the reason I point all those things out is that in order to like try to have a scaled conversation, is that so one-on-one you can sort of do pretty well. You can work through bias, you can work through that. When you go to scale, there's interesting challenges. So the first one is manufacturing consent. Then we have the idea of creating polarization with polls, surveys. There's the idea of inviting thoughts into the void. There's selection bias and false representation. There's politicizing discourse. I'm just going to touch on each of them and again keep the bit rate kind of high. The first question here, can you put into the chat, what's your favorite ice cream flavor? Is it 1, mint, 2, licorice, or 3, bubblegum? Can I get somebody to put their favorite into the chat? Vivian just said mint. Ooh, chocolate chip. David, that was not on my pre-disturbed mint. Thank you, mint. All right, so what I'm doing right now is I'm manufacturing your consent, because I'm actually saying these are the only 3 ice cream flavors that I have here. Licorice and bubblegum I made intentionally sort of terrible, and I didn't add chocolate chip to the mint. And that's because Noam Chomsky would hate me for trying to over summarize a Noam Chomsky concept. But the idea is that manufacturing consent is actually limiting the number of acceptable outcomes, giving them to the populace. So any one of them as they select, I only have 3 ice cream flavors, but if I did this to my kids, they would not have given the answers that you put in the chat. What's your favorite ice cream here? None of them, Dad. I'm actually, let's go. It's actually, you know, it's caramel. I don't know what it is today, but let's go actually to a place where I get to choose freely what ice cream I get. I don't like the fact that you tried to limit me down to this false selection of 3. I've been to the ice cream store. I know there's 50 flavors. But actually what happens is that when you send out and limit responses, like in any sort of survey, how do you feel about something? And you say, here's 3 responses, you know, do you think we should do this, this, or this? Our reaction is actually to go, I don't know if that's really all the possible options here. I don't necessarily feel, we sense manufacturing consent like it's a 6th sense. We're just like, oof, I don't know. You ever got a survey sent out from the government or something that's like, which way should we, yeah, thanks, other. Which of these 5 ways should we spend our government dollars? You're like, how about none, actually? Who came up with the list? Always is the question you have on your brain, right? So this is just an interesting way that you're actually accidentally creating a gap in between you when you're trying to say, I'm just trying to get your opinion on something, but actually you're making people go, what are you doing to me? I feel manipulated. The next one is creating polarization. Should most of us work in an office after the pandemic? Put a 1 in the chat for yes or a 2 for no. Actually, you don't have to do that. That's a joke. You don't have to do it. The reason I put that is that people that are doing this are running quick polls to say, what do you think, yes or no? And what that's turning into is like the officers and the non-officers, the vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers, the hybrids and the face-to-face, and now maybe there's the totally remote. But the point is a complex question. This actually, as we figure it out, I've been working on a hybrid strategy for our company for 10 years, and it sort of changes as we grow. We have a few offices, we have some anchor tenants, we have some people who prefer based on their family situation, and their family gets a little older and then they want to work from home. It's a fluid situation. As soon as you say yes and no, you're actually creating factions, and then you're like, oh, I live in this camp. I live in the yes camp, because I guess I have to really firm up my belief here, because if not, what's going to happen? Well, the no camp's going to take away my right to have a yes camp. And just doing little polls like this actually starts to solidify the differences. So something that's driving me crazy on Earth right now, LinkedIn polls. Let's find more ways to divide people. On every other post is let's actually divide ourselves in 5 different ways and make sure that we can see our differences on every issue and make sure we're further divided on every topic you can possibly imagine. Is it this, 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 or this? As if that's a way that humans actually are, which they're not. So we really need to think through, where are we creating polarization and why in the hell are we doing that? It was actually to spawn conversation, to spawn ideas, to get people interested, aligned, sharing their thinking. But in fact, we're basically saying, get into polarizing groups and let's actually take some joy in that. But maybe right now in our organizations and our planet, we need to be thinking, let's maybe not polarize issues. And when we were going to take a poll, maybe we wanted to have a conversation instead. This next one is called the void. What should we consider during this change? Let us know. How much confidence does that give you when people ask open-ended, let us know? The answer is not a lot, because who's looking at that? Like, where does it go? Is it being organized, codified, machine learning, gonna do some natural language process on it and make a pretty word cloud? I don't get it. And therefore you're like, next or delete. The idea that you can ask people about change into a void is actually a bit of a problem, and also, again, destroys trust. This one's interesting, false representation. I've spoken to people who look like you, act like you, make similar amounts of money as you, and therefore, here's your lunch. It's a chicken salad sandwich, it's clam chowder, there's a Stella, and there's some Jello. I tried to make the worst lunch possible here. Individual pieces, not bad. As a group, somehow terrible. The point is, there's a lot of this going on where people want to be treated how they want to be treated, and grouping them to say, actually, we've talked to people that are just like you is a fundamental diversity problem. And then we say we're rolling out this change based on us talking to people who are like you, and having people go, I don't know if you know me, to say that you're talking to people who are just like me. Who is this group that is meant to represent me? And why didn't you talk to me? This idea of false representation, actually, and again, we think it's helping, but it's actually destroying some trust, where we're making an attempt to actually represent people, but without a diversity lens, saying, well, it's actually not fair to say we've talked to people who kind of seem like you or look like you or make money like you, and then therefore they represent you. Representation is a bit of a problem. Dissemination, hearing from people, using people to help disseminate knowledge, really interesting. Representation, a little bit tricky. The last one is politicizing discourse. So a lot of founders, a lot of groups, a lot of leaders have been doing this for a long time, but I've noticed a bit of a trend, which is people are getting more and more staged, more and more questions. There's software to make sure that only the right question gets vetted. You can upvote, and then there's a veil behind it, and then people are selecting and polishing up a question and putting it out in front of people. My question is, how do you feel when you watch town hall meetings on TV or online that are highly polished, highly practiced, well lit, etc.? Not great. You felt like it's political. That's the answer. And I'm sorry I didn't actually ask you that question. But the truth is, we don't feel a lot of like raised affinity when we see really nice, polished presentations from people. We actually feel like, what are you hiding? I don't get it. We know that people aren't like that, which brings me to my leadership coaching advice here that I like to give, which is just tell your executives, don't be weird. It's an interesting thing that I feel like executives are kind of getting weirder and weirder online. As they're investing in better and better lighting techniques and things like that. So I wanted to run through those things because I wanted you to sort of think through, what are we doing to separate ourselves right now as we go into this next piece, which is really around, okay, then Dave, what's a conversation? Because a conversation actually has to have the ability to share an independent thought, a safe space. It has to be bias-free. You have to have fair process. You need to figure out what matters most. When I talk about safety, it's that a limiting leader belief is that if somebody has something to say, they should have the professionalism and courage to say it to my face. The number of people that I have heard say this to me as someone who has a company that removes people's names from things in order to actually ensure that thoughts are being valued on their merit, it's actually astounding the number of people that are like, well, Dave, I don't know, I've never used a tool like that, because people they need the professionalism and courage to say it to my face. Well, there's a lot of reasons why our history of sexism, our history of systemic racism, career limiting idea of a new hire coming in and having the gall to tell their boss that they don't believe necessarily in the strategy. If that's the idea here, is that if you're not offering people safety, if you're like, well, of course I would reward anyone who challenged me. Yeah, I don't know. If that's your overall viewpoint, that's the number of people inside the circle that you're talking to, and that's everyone else around you that would give you the information you need to succeed, but do not feel safe enough for many valid reasons. And we need to acknowledge safety is really important in any organization. The next one, everyone has to agree with me. That's back to that quote. The next one is this bias-free method of evaluating thoughts. So here's the thing, is that there's a lot of ways to gather feedback from people, but I want to feel that that bias isn't being used when I'm being listened to. So if I feel like people are biased against me for who I am, I don't actually feel that my thoughts are actually being considered. I want my thought to be considered by people one at a time. And so I can't actually have a conversation by just doing a group open-ended survey and then getting all those feedback. I don't feel like I've had a conversation. I'm talking to you one-on-one and I feel like I'm not being biased against. I do feel that way. I want each thought to be considered equally. And I don't want one thought to be considered more based on its seniority or based on its perception of value. I just asked this, I put this in here because the idea is like, do you want your thoughts to be heard and considered equally? Like, who doesn't? We have a right to our voice. It's one of the fundamental rights and freedoms as a human on the planet, in my view. And just granting people their access to this right is important. Do you want to be heard? Probably you should have an opportunity to do such a thing. The last one is just tools to understand importance, because the idea that we're just going to get first thought, best thought from people, that common sense is just a deposit of prejudices laid down in our mind. This is likely Einstein who said this. The quote reader, I'm not sure if it's totally true, it's Einstein, but the point is, if you have a conversation and you don't get someone who helps summarize and say, this is what I heard you say, and I think this is what we just agreed that we're going to do, right? If that moment doesn't happen, or like, I heard you on that, I'm not sure what we're going to do, but I heard you. If you don't have that moment where you actually say, I understood you, you don't feel like you've had a conversation, that you spoke one way and the person just like, great, I've heard you. And then they walk away. So you have to have some sort of tool to do that. All right, so this last section, before I get back to the Q&A part, I'm going to try to actually help you think through the first word in the conversation that we had, which was engagement. So why do we want to scale conversations in our organizations? Why do we want to have more conversations? You can't just tell people to be better and be more empathetic. You have to teach people. Why do you need to teach empathy, listening, understanding, how to listen, how to communicate? Why do you need to scale the ability to converse in your organization? Well, your capital are the assets you have available for your purpose. And we think about capital quite narrowly often, is that in raising capital, we think about it just as money. But capital is actually everything, all the assets that we have available. And I like to show this chart because this is the crisis cycle of things that have happened over the course of the last, lifetime. But things happen, there's a crisis, you react, there's a crisis, you change things, there's another crisis, you relaunch things, and there's a lot of pain in the bottom, there's a lot of joy at the top. And this can be your life too. As you go through, you get your first boyfriend or girlfriend, you get dumped the first time, you graduate, you get married, you get divorced, you have your first major career breakthrough, and then maybe you lose your first parent. Your life kind of goes up and down like this, then ultimately it ends at the bottom in death, and you die, and it's very sad. And you can see your whole life this way, that it goes up and down, that it just ends down. But the truth is that inside this, when you think about the relationships that you have that are the strongest in your life, those people that you actually really lean on, where were they? Were they just there in the tops of these things? You're all in companies that go through crisis all the time if you're doing anything and breaking things and moving fast. Are they there just every time things go good? And then rhetorical question, no, they're actually there when things get hard, when there's actually some challenges. So the interesting thing is that as you go through crisis, it turns out there's more and more opportunities for connection, and the people you have the best relationships with have actually been through the most crisis with you along the way. They were there for you all through the ups and downs. And so when we think about things right now, navigating crisis is a constant opportunity to create connection in your organization if you know how to do that. So I'm going to just quickly go through a couple of ways. This is the first one I want to talk about. I want to set out to actually take two words right off of our whole library of words we use inside the space of talking to people. One of them is engagement. The idea of engagement is interesting. I'm going to actually do another talk to the chat. So your boss or your board or somebody comes up to you and says, all right, I want to have a conversation with you. I want to engage you more in your work. Therefore, I want to have a conversation with you because I think that you need to be engaged more in your work, and I want to make sure that you are engaged. Put in the chat how that would make you feel if your boss says, I want to talk to you because I want you to be more engaged in your work. Thank you. Nervous, not happy. I'm freaking out. I'm freaking out. Those are really great, right? So go pound sand, boss. So here's the thing. We talk about engagement as if it's a good thing, but yet if we imagine someone saying, hey, I want to engage you, you think, yeah, I'm going to start looking for a new job. Yet when we talk about, I want to engage employees, well, that presupposes that they're not. It has this patronizing flavor to it, which is like, you know what? you must not be engaged. I want to do an engagement survey. I want to do stakeholder engagement. By the way, the other word I want to take off the map is stakeholder. A stakeholder is literally somebody in a card game who holds the stakes because they're not playing the game. It drives me crazy. I'm writing an article on this right now. The stakeholder is literally the person that at the end of the game has nothing to gain, nothing to lose. They just dole out everything back based on the rules. And we call stakeholders the most important people, which is weird. And then we say engagement, which assumes that they're not already engaged. And if we ever got those words used on us, I want to engage you, we'd say, well, that sounds terrifying, and I'd freak out. And then we turn around and say, well, okay, let's actually engage our team. Okay, well, how are they thinking? I'm kind of feeling like I want to freak out because I feel kind of engaged in what I'm doing. So the language of leadership is about unification. It's about alignment. We actually don't really want to think about people help support things they create, and they're talented people. You are talented people. You feel like you've dedicated your life and career, and you want to align your best work with the best work of the purpose of your organization. And that actually creates ownership. People support things that they help create. So the reason why is this idea of ownership capital. So the idea ownership is not limited to material things. It can also apply to points of view. People, you can actually get some ownership over your purpose. If you align the purpose of people with the purpose of your organization, you can create alignment. If you need to engage people, it presupposes they have no purpose. So therefore we need to engage them so that they have purpose. People have purpose. We need to actually align the purpose of people with the purpose of the organization. Ownership also applies to material things, and it's really best not to forget that too. And the reason I put that in is that when we think of like conversations that we can have that enhance and create ownership capital, it's like, what perspectives we need to understand as we update our strategy. You can ask anybody for their perspective. You can ask the person who just joined your company as an EA yesterday, what perspectives do you need to understand as we update our strategy for next year? What do you need to achieve our goals? Notice how we went back and forth there. What do you need? Not what does the company need of you to achieve the company's goals? What do you need to achieve our goals? And then finally, what are some cost saving options we could consider? I don't know, maybe a fundraising round is going to be another 6 months off or something. It's our company. We're growing it together. What could we consider? People are really afraid to have a conversation about taking things away from people, but actually, if we're all in it together, it's not a fearful conversation. I put those up as questions that create capital, in that they actually create trust. If you're not talking to people like an other, using the words of engagement, using the words of stakeholders. And I want to end on this final concept for you that I hope creates this is the big end. If I was juggling, this would be like the six torches, or 7, or whatever is really hard. I can only juggle 2. The Blackfoot, not to take all credit away from Maslow, worked with Blackfoot people, and not appropriating culture is really important. That there's a hierarchy of needs that Maslow talks about, and he actually got a lot of informing about how that actually has multi-generational aspect. It's not all about ourselves. Asking about culture and vision destroys your ownership capital when safety and structure aren't present. So if you've wondered why having conversations has been a bit challenging during a pandemic, I'm hoping that this diagram might help you understand why. Is that humans have a basic need. They basically, if we don't have our safety and security taken care of, we cannot talk about vision and purpose. It's not going to work. Okay. So the idea is, if we're having this, if you're like on the first day of the pandemic, you're at home, you don't know what's happening to your mom and dad, and then your CEO, or you are a CEO, and you're like, hey, let's talk about everything's crazy right now. Let's talk about the future. Let's talk about creating a new vision for our company. Because obviously things are changing really rapidly. You're like, holy hell, I don't even know if I'm gonna live. Lloyd just said that he actually nearly died of COVID, which sounds terrible. And now you can't talk about people figuring out vision and purpose when people are like, I don't know if I'm gonna be safe tomorrow. I don't know if I'm gonna have a paycheck. I don't know if we have enough runway. If people are in that spot of not having safety and security addressed, and it can range from security to, we just missed our number in Q2, and that means our raise might be pushed off, and now I'm feeling a little terrified. If we're not having that conversation about challenges that are on people's minds, we can't move up the hierarchy. But the reverse is a really good news information, is that actually you can move up the hierarchy if you have those conversations. Hey, we've aligned on some of the challenges. It seems like right now, I think we figured out how to manage this whole pandemic thing. We'll see Omicron. Well, I don't know, but we're figuring it out. We got this hybrid model. So now we can start talking about structure and process. We can talk about alignment. And if we get some things around what we can do together in conversation, we can start talking about stories of how we work together. We can talk about our future. But if you're ever wondering what's not landing when you're like, I want to do a new strategic plan for 2023, and people are like, I don't know, screw you, this company's going down the tubes. You're like, oof, maybe I missed something in the hierarchy of people's needs here. Maybe my conversation needed to start with, how you doing? Let's actually talk about the challenges you're experiencing before we can actually move up. So this is just, I'm just going to close on the only plug I have for ThoughtExchange is that as a company, how can you actually employ conversations to do inclusive strategy, to love your revenue team and listen to them and talk to them on a regular basis, talk to new leaders and align talent. That's what we do as a company. I'm not here to plug that much, but I am going to end with throwing a link in the chat, which is if you want a free book, I'm happy to give that to you. And before we turn it back over to Lloyd, I just love any comments back from people into the thread. What's something that came up for you based on what I just sort of ripped through and sort of high speed? Can I get a few comments? What landed for you based on what we just went through?
A lot has landed for a lot of people. Definitely. It was a great presentation. I loved how interactive it was. While people are making those comments, I see here, Jill says, you ought to run for office.
Oh, thank you.
Folks, hit your comments to everyone. So here there's a question by an anonymous attendee. Can you please speak to how generational differences impact these conversations? I feel it's a very millennial thing to freak out about being asked for a meeting or having your engagement questioned, and younger generations are more tuned into sensitivity, discrimination issues, whereas older generations may be less aware of these biases. What's your viewpoint on that? I don't want to like label sort of people or groups of people, but like, what is your viewpoint on that?
I'm 43. So I feel like I'm walking down the edge of this conversation. I don't even know what they call my generation exactly, but I will say that when I talk to people who don't identify as millennials, they're like, you know, do I value diversity? Do I value my voice? Do I want to be heard? I mean, yeah, I just didn't know I was allowed to say that stuff at work. I was raised at a time that I wasn't allowed to bring that, but actually the value of people that are older, I think the values are aligned. I think that there is a strength in young people coming and making it something that I'm actually creating a firm. I'm not going to work here unless actually these conditions are met, where maybe the previous generation is like, I don't know, I've been a company person and it sucked around here for a long time, but it's not like I can just open Zoom and go work for another company. So I think there's an interesting push, but I don't actually see, I've seen some really great millennium presenters that actually, they show all the things that people value, and they show actually the data is that, you know, people in older generation actually value the same thing. They just maybe didn't realize that they were allowed to show up work and make those kind of demands.
Definitely. One question from me here. For leaders to become better communicators and communicate without bias, what are the top 3 to 5 things that they can start putting into action today?
Yeah. So I think one is just like, if you start in a conversation saying that, yeah, I'm pretty sure I don't have any bias coming into this, you're just wrong. You're stupid and wrong. I'm sorry. And with love, I say with love. But yeah, like we need to understand the bias we bring to a conversation. That would be number 1, 2, and 3 probably. Like as a white male guy, I'm a CEO. I feel like there's been a little fewer than 20 African-American CEOs in the Fortune 500, and there's been more men named Dave in many studies in the Fortune 500 as CEOs than women total. And my name's Dave. I'm not in the Fortune 500 yet, but I'm Dave. I'm 6 feet tall, which is the average height of CEOs in the Fortune 500. I'm white. And if I don't actually come in acknowledging that I have unearned privilege, specifically unearned privilege, I think that there's something there. And also, like, I got to show up curious. I got to show up that probably something's going to hurt. So 1 is acknowledging your bias. 2, learning. There's a really interesting bit of science. If you get your bias confirmed, you're like, I thought this was going to go this way. And you're like, oh, it did. It went just how I went. It's the same as if you just ate sugar. Your brain goes like num, 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 num. It's like watching your favorite Instagram scrolling. Your brain's like num, num, dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. But if your bias gets challenged, if you're like, I thought this was how people thought, and then you learn, no, it's not how they thought. And it's actually because you had a limiting belief and you had bias that's why you saw the world that way. It occurs to you as pain. It actually hurts. The same things as if you got pinched. That's what happens in your brain. You're like, ow. You're not like, hey, revelation. It feels like num, 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 dopamine. No, it's like, shit, that hurts. Getting my bias challenged. I don't want to. So the next one is that if you're in a conversation and you go like, ouch, that's probably a good thing, because probably you're getting your bias challenged a little bit in a conversation. And don't go to fight, flight, or freeze. Just go like, okay, that hurt me. Have that be a trigger to get you into curiosity. Get curious would be like, I don't know. I just went through 1, 2, and 3, and that's my curiosity is also 1, 2, and 3. How can we be more curious in that moment of effectively pain? Going like, I think you're maybe missing something, Dave, here about how people are feeling. I'm like, ah, shit, ouch. Yep. I'm going to try to show up curious. It's not my strong suit, but I'm going to do my best.
Awesome. And no session goes without closing on, what are your favorite books? What books or podcasts or resources you've consumed that have shaped you into the leader you are today?
I mean, the thing I'm really spinning a lot on right now is conscious capitalism. Ray Sisodia, for those of you who don't know conscious capitalism and the healing organization, Shakti leadership, I just encourage you to go figure that out. That's a world of looking into. How to Be an Anti-Racist was a really foundation shifting sort of book for me to understand. I like reading books that try to expand my way of viewing the world. I don't actually read too many sort of startup leadership books. I maybe should. But yeah, those sort of books, or at least are my latest reads that have shaped my thinking.
Awesome. And any others in the early days of starting your company?
Oh, and I mean, Lean Startup, there's some of the standards. Like, I don't think you should start a company without reading Lean Startup. I think that's just table stakes. And
how about people and culture? You wrote a great book, right? Scaling Conversations, but anything else around people, culture, conversations that has shaped your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and some of my proudest moments, like Michelle Obama's book, her autobiography is the sort of thing that I was really stoked to read about, like people that have lived astonishing lives. As opposed to people who necessarily think and write about culture. I sort of like people who talk about what they created. So I love autobiographies, and I love innovators. So I'll read autobiographies of innovators all the time. But that's more my thing, is I like reading about how people did something a bit more than what people say about doing things, which is funny because then I wrote a book about saying how to do something, which I probably would never read my own book. That's the truth.
Definitely. Awesome. This has been a fantastic interactive session. The recording is going to be on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. Just go to YouTube, search for Traction Conf and hit subscribe. We have a great number of sessions coming up later this week. We have the CRO at ChargeBee is going to talk about the secret sauce behind hyper-growth companies. And we also are doing a best of Traction and turning into a podcast. So you'll hear more about that in the coming weeks. Dave, enjoy Kauai with your family. Folks, thanks for tuning in. Love and peace.
Thanks a lot. Have an awesome time with your kid too. Thanks, everyone.